Okay, folks, our final installment of part 1 of Unit 2, Module 15, Evolutionary Psychology. Okay, so what we're going to do in this module is we're going to look at the differences between male and females, especially in terms of sexuality and mating preferences. Again, when we make comments, folks, we are talking about gender as a whole. We are not focusing on any one in particular individual. We're also going to look at how evolutionary psychologists look at natural selection to explain our behavior and our tendencies. We're also going to discuss criticisms of evolutionary explanations and how it tries to explain human sexuality. We'll also discuss how evolutionary psychologists respond to that claim. And then lastly, the biopsychosocial approach to development. Okay. So let's talk about the guy that started it all, Charles Darwin, a naturalist that comes up with the theory of evolution, writes the book, The Origin of Species. He basically lays the framework for this concept of evolution. All right, so what is natural selection? Natural selection is the idea that traits that are inherited better enable an organism to survive. And basically, those stronger traits compete with less strong traits. And therefore, through the process of mating and natural selection, certain traits will die out, and other traits that are stronger, more adaptable, will be passed from generation to generation. What about mutation? Mutation is a random error change in the genetic code. It's going to lead to a change in a trait or in heritability. And mutations can be fairly quick, but most of the time mutations take generations to propagate. All right, basic principles of Darwin. So what we see is when we look at Darwin, he has this idea of survival of the fittest and natural selection. But in order for his theories to work, nature has to provide some explanation. So in this case, when various species have young, those young will be different. Except, of course, in the case of identical twins. But again, identical twins is a rarity compared to the rest of, propagation. So the idea is that offspring must be varied. Different traits are passed to different offspring. So if there's multiple offspring in a litter or multiple children in a family, whatever the case might be, children will be different. And then those variations, both biological and behavioral, they'll either increase or possibly decrease the chances of survival in that environment. And then the offspring that do survive have the greatest chance of passing on their genetic information to the next generation. And depending on the population and the environment, all of these things can change and adapt over time. Let's look at the Russian fox study. Belayev and Trut spent about 40 years studying foxes. And we'll talk about another case that we all know of, but probably may or may not link to this study. But basically, these Russians are going to selectively breed foxes, and they only will breed the tamest and most docile and eager to please foxes year after year after year after year. And what they find is that after 30 generations, approximately 40 years, they were able to produce docile, eager to please domesticated animals. And this provides an example of how psychological traits can be selected and then selectively bred and passed to future generations. Folks, a lot of us have pets, and for those of you that have dogs all originate from the wolf, and those dogs, over hundreds and thousands of years of selective breeding, now have become domesticated, and we have all sorts of various types of dogs. But again, that those tame and docile traits have been bred and again and again and again from generation to generation, creating a very tame and docile animal as opposed to a wild and unpredictable wolf. Okay, so what about natural selection that occurs in nature? Um, well, basically, when we talk about historical genes, we're talking about all of the genetic material passed from grandparents to parents, parents to children, and all the way back, all throughout our ancestral line. And what happens is that what we see in those genes that are passed, we actually can measure to a degree our capacity to learn and adapt to life. And even in one generation, we have the ability to adapt to certain environments. We're human beings. We're incredibly intelligent, whether that's living on a beach in the tropics or if it's moving to Antarctica. We have the ability to attempt to adapt. Now, some of us may be better at that than others, but those that have to adapt to a harsh environment are going to be more likely to survive. And the interesting thing that science has found is that both experience and genes are kind of merged together to kind of create the hardwiring for our brain. So again, we have nature versus nurture, or in this case, nature combined with nurture. And we consider this to be called adaptive flexibility. And basically, our ability to be flexible in our behavioral and emotional responses allows us to have greater rates of survivability and greater rates of coping and adjusting. Now, whether that's, surviving in the jungle or getting along with coworkers. Okay, let's look at sexuality differences. Males have a tendency to be more aggressive. They have a tendency to be more likely to initiate sexual activity. We have a tendency to over-assume in female interest in ourselves, and we can see examples of this in the natural world. Males in the natural world, in the animal kingdom, oftentimes will mate with multiple females every year, and we are animals, and we males have that genetic desire, although we keep it in check with morality and marriage and other social aspects, social rules, social constraints. Females, on the other hand, oftentimes look for mates that are well built physically. The strength is a genetically admirable trait in a lot of women. Slim waists, tall, and then a lot of women prefer a more mature male. And this is something, again, that we see in the animal kingdom. A lot of times when juvenile males or males that haven't quite reached sexual maturity will try to mate with females, but the females will reject their advances. But on the other hand, what we have is mature males oftentimes will be more apt to mate with the females. Again, like I said, that is not our reality today. Most families, we don't always have, about 50% of America has gone through a divorce. So the family dynamic script has changed. Divorce is far more acceptable than what it used to be. We now have multiple extended families, step families, and it's not uncommon for many women to have to be out in the workplace, earning a job along with the males in the family. So it's a situation where social scripting has changed due to society's changes. Okay, we're going to skip on this one because I think you all can go through those examples on your own. And again, lastly, the biopsychosocial approach is how we look at environment. So the biological aspect would be our genes and our hereditary that are passed on, and also in a way, it is the dying off or the perpetuation of genes that are passed from generation to generation through survivability that is also part of the biological aspect. The psychological aspect of evolutionary psychology will be the idea of our psychological processes being able to adapt and change over time. and from generation to generation. The social cultural, these are greatly affected by our social scripts, how we interact with other people, how we interact with our culture. These are all dictated by the social cultural aspect of the biopsychosocial approach. Um, okay, folks, that pretty much wraps it up for us. That is the end of part one. So stay tuned for modules 20 through 25. This will be states of consciousness, and this will be the second part of Unit 2. I'll see y'all soon.